This is the Comics Alternative for young readers. Reviews of Rust the Boy Soldier, Sweater Weather and Other Short Stories, and Dinosaurs, Fossils and Feathers.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative for Young Readers. I'm Andy.
And I'm Gwen, and we're two people with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this episode of the Comics Alternative for Young Readers, we're going to take a look at three new books: Rust the Boy Soldier by Royden Lepp, Sweater Weather and Other Short Stories by Sara, Varon, and Dinosaurs, Fossils and Feathers by M.K. Reed and Joe Flood. But before we go any further, we'd like for you to know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the fine folks at Discount Comic Book Service. When you go to dcbservice.com, there you can find all that you will need for your pre-ordering for your great books. They have Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse titles at 40% off. The other publishers, they're between 20 and 35% off. And sometimes the specials are 45 to 50% off the cover price. And you never know. Sometimes the discounts go even higher than that.
That's right, and we've got some really great comics for kids this week that are on sale at Discount Comic Book Service. This month, they have Marvel's Kid Bundle that includes Marvel Universe Guardians of the Galaxy number 8, Marvel Universe Ultimate Spider-Man Contest of the Champions number 3, and Marvel Universe Avengers Assemble Civil War number 3. You can get all three comics for $4.47, which is 50% off of the cover price. And then we also have a great DC Kids bundle at Discount Comic Book Service. It's Scooby-Doo Team Up number 16 and Scooby-Doo Where Are You number 69, and you can get both of those wonderful Scooby-Doo titles for $2.98.
Wow.
Again, yes, 50% off of the cover price. And Andy, I have to tell you that the Team Up cover is awesome this month. Daphne and Velma are participating in a haunted roller derby. So if that isn't enough to get you excited,
man.
I don't know what will.
That is awesome.
And you know, when I'm watching roller derby or reading comics, you know what I like? Coffee.
Yeah, you know, Gwen, I'm glad you mentioned that because one of our newer sponsors is Just Coffee Co-op. And that is a company that offers 100% fair trade, shade-grown, organic certified coffee. And Just Coffee Co-op's coffee is roasted in small batches. There's no mass production. Everything is made to order. Just Coffee Co-op is a very socially conscious organization. They partner to raise money and awareness for sustainable community development in farming regions all over the world. And the great part is there's no minimum order and the shipping is absolutely free. And all you have to do is to go to their website, and that is justcoffee.coop, C-O-O-P. And when you check out, use our coupon code COMICS, all caps C-O-M-I-C-S. This will give you a 10% off on your order, and it will also help support the podcast. So go to their website, get caffeinated. That's justcoffee.coop. Well, Gwen, we got some really, really great books to take a look at. And before we do that, how are things been going with you?
Really well. This was my spring break, and even though I didn't go anywhere, I got caught up on a lot of things that I needed to do. I'm almost finished with midterm grading. So, you know, here in university land, that's a big deal. It's definitely the halfway point. So doing well, and it's been so warm. I live in Michigan, as you know, and this has been the warmest winter I have ever experienced. Yesterday it was in the 50s. It's going to be in the 60s today and tomorrow. So I cannot complain. How are you doing, Andy?
Pretty good. Although I'm getting over a cold, and we were talking off mic about how we're both kind of feeling sick. So maybe we should call this two sick people with PhDs talking about comics.
Well, I find it kind of funny because our listeners are going to hear us talking about dinosaurs later, and I was saying some of the names of dinosaurs, and let me tell you, when you have a cold, it sounds special. So, folks, you might want to forgive us in advance for our pronunciation. Somehow Brontosaurus kind of sounds like something you'd take for a cold.
Yeah, it
so
does. Yeah.
Or at least it would make you forget your cold if it were chasing you. So I suppose there's that.
That is true. Your cold would be not the most primary thing.
Low priority.
Right.
Well, let's start talking about our first comic, which I really enjoyed, Andy. It's so cool, and you were the one who suggested it, so hat tip to you as well.
Well, thank you. Well, our first comic we're talking about is called Rust, the Boy Soldier, and this is by a Canadian creator named Royden Lepp, and this is kind of an odd comic for us to start with in some ways because this is actually, I guess you could actually call this a prequel. Rust is a series that began in 2011, and the first book in that series was called Rust, A Visitor in the Field. And this is an adventure story about a boy named Jet, which is an appropriate name since he has a jet pack. And Jet crashes into a barn after being chased by a giant robot. Now, this isn't just some ordinary random robot, but this is a decommissioned war robot. They were using robots for war. I'm not going to tell you too much about the war right now, but it was a devastating world war that has just ended, and the people are trying to recover. Well, the Taylors are one such family trying to recover from this devastating war, and they have a farm that they're trying to keep going, but things are really, really not going well on the farm. And then when Jet crashes into their barn, it's even more of a hardship for them. Jet decides to stay with the Taylors and offers to help them. They're not really sure why Jet knows so much about robots and whether or not they can trust him. Now, so far in the series Rust, there are 3 hardcover volumes, and these are all from Archaea. Beautiful, beautiful books, and I know we're going to talk in a few moments about the details about them. But there's a 4th book coming out, hopefully very soon. And in each of these books, Royden Lepp has given readers a prologue. And those prologues answer some of the questions that we have about this time and place and the wars and the robots, but sometimes the prologues ask more questions than they answer. And Rust, the Boy Soldier, the book we're talking about today, collects all of those prologues and adds some new material to the story. It's a really good introduction for those who haven't read any of the Rust volumes, but for those people that have read those volumes, I think this is essential reading.
Yeah, I hadn't read them, Andy, and yet I could follow along very well with what was going on, and it's made me want to read the series now. So I think for an uninitiated reader, it's not a leap at all to understand what's going on. I do wonder, I was thinking about this, and we really didn't talk about it before we started recording today, but what age range do you think this might fall under? You are our library expert. What do you think?
Well, Gwen, we have this in our youngest category at the library. We have it in the J fiction, juvenile fiction section.
Okay.
And really that can be anything from old enough to read up to about 12 or so. I've put this in the hands of several kids that are probably in the 10 to 12 age range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting because visually it reminds me a lot of a comic that we talked about recently, Jorge Corona's Feathers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because yet again, we have a protagonist who's a young boy and is interestingly composed, if you will, in terms of his background and history. And so, and from the same overarching publisher. And so, but that one is much more YA. And I was sort of wondering what you would think, because that makes a lot of sense to me too. But I think our teen readers might enjoy it as well. Certainly it's beautifully drawn, and Lepp is a video game creator. And there's a lot that, I don't know if you saw this, but I saw a lot in there that reminded me a lot of video game narration as well as illustration. So I think some of our older readers might enjoy it too.
Yeah, I think so. It's got a very kind of a historical old look, and it resembles a lot of the photographs that we see from World War I. And some of the style. It's all of the books are kind of sepia toned as far as their artwork goes. They look like a lot of old photographs in some ways. And one of the things that I really like about how Lepp creates this is he has the scenes of action sometimes are kind of blurry, like you're watching like the middle of a person running or jet flying or something like that. And the video game connection that you make is a really, really applicable aspect of this. And Gwen, I'm not surprised that Lepp is a game designer, because so much of the comic, especially the parts that are adventure based, and there are quite a few of those, they have the feel of a video game in progress, or if we were looking at just isolated scenes from it. He does action so well, and a lot of times we will see a panel or several panels of isolated action when taken together look like something we would see in a video game or on a movie.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that is significant to this comic is that Jet often flies through the air. There's a lot of wonderful perspective that you get. It almost makes me feel like I'm in a virtual reality environment when I'm looking at some of the pages. There's one where he sort of is escaping from some people who are following him, and he leaps up into the air. And I don't remember that page, but I almost felt like I could feel him flying. So you can really see that Lepp is excellent at showing perspective in his drawings and really drawing the reader in and feeling as if they're almost part of the action.
Yeah, I agree. There's something that, and we don't want to tell you too much about Jet, and Gwen, I have read the other 3 volumes, so I may have a little bit different perspective than you do, but Jet is, without telling you too much, Jet is kind of caught in between a couple of different ideas and ideals. He wants to help people out, but there's a reason that he understands the robots and everything that's going on, and you could actually echo the theme of this volume that we're talking about today from the pages of Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. And also with great responsibility comes hard choices. Right. And in this book, and really the entire series, allows young readers to explore the complexities of war while they're reading an exciting adventure story. And I think there's a reason why Lepp chose this color palette. It's not black and white. There's a lot of not actual grays, but conceptual grays. There's, reading this, we aren't really sure exactly who's right and who's wrong, but we do see a lot of conflict, and Jet is having to deal with a lot of that conflict as a young person.
I was reading an interview by Lepp, and he talks about that, Andy, exactly. He underscores what you're saying. Originally, he had thought about doing it in gray tone, and he chose the sepia in part because he said that it evokes the past, like you were talking about. It does have a feel of mid-century, mid-20th century to it in terms of its battle scenes, but also he wanted to show warmth or heat. In terms of warfare, in terms of the climate on the farm, and in terms of the emotion that the characters are showing. And I agree, it's really a beautiful comic to look at. And in its depiction of war, it's not all that different from a text like Jacques Tardi's It Was a War of the Trenches. There is a certain amount of gritty realism, but it's not violence for violence sakes by any means. And in fact, the violence that occurs in the prologues in a way helps us to understand Jet and his motivations. And that's why I'm very eager to read the series. And you seem to indicate that it's a great series and worth the read for sure.
Yeah, and you make a great point about the prologue and about the violence that's in it. Nothing is really, really graphic. Still, this is a book about death and war violence, and it might be disturbing for possibly very young readers. So, Gwen, I appreciate you asking me what ages I would recommend it for. Very, very young readers, probably not quite ready for this yet, but it depends on your child. But I would say, there are probably some 8-year-olds that are ready for this, and maybe some others that might be 10 or so. But I think there's so much depth in this. And Gwen, I was trying to figure out, the last couple of times we've talked about books and we've talked about other books that are like them that our readers might enjoy. I can't really think of anything that's quite like this to compare it to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it visually, like I said, it reminded me a little of Feathers, but in terms of the way that it presents ethical dilemmas, for me, this is really a first in the specific comics we've talked about. Although now that I said that, I'm thinking maybe Monster might be the closest parallel, but again, that's a YA text, and it's definitely a realist text, and so you have a slightly different, genre situation going on there too. But I think it would be a wonderful text actually to use if you wanted to sort of introduce your young reader to ethics, to sort of the sort of questions that we have to ask ourselves as we're trying to figure out who we are and what we believe. And so for that reason, I think parents would really enjoy sharing this with a young reader, or many of our young listeners might want to pick this up.
Yeah, I think so. And if you pick up Rust the Boy Soldier, you'll definitely want to check out the rest of the books in the series, which actually are being reprinted this year in anticipation of the fourth and final book in the series. Now, I think this is really important because the original books that came out were in hardcover, and for a kid's graphic novel, they were a bit on the expensive side. They were $25. I read them from the library, but they're going to be republished again in paperback, and so the prices should be much, much less. And if you can find them on our sponsor, In Stock Trades or DCB Service, it'll probably even be a greater discount. All right. Well, Gwen, do you want to move ahead to our next book?
Yes, we're going to be talking today about Sara Varon's brand new release, Sweater Weather and Other Short Stories. Now, Sara Varon is a printmaker, a graphic novelist, and a children's book author. She lives in Brooklyn, and her books include the wonderfully titled Odd Duck, Bake Sale, Robot Dreams, Chicken and Cat, and her most recent, before this text, Chicken and Cat Clean Up, which is probably a volume I should be reading right now. Sara has won so many awards, but most notably, in 2013, she was a recipient of the Maurice Sendak Fellowship. Now, most of us know Maurice Sendak as the wonderful author and illustrator of award-winning children's picture books, including Where the Wild Things Are. And he bequeathed the fellowship for young, aspiring children's illustrators. And I want to read you what the criteria was for this award, because I think it's really, it says a lot about Sara Varon herself. The idea of the fellowship was to create work that is not vapid, stupid, or sexy, but original, work that excites and incites. And Sara is such a unique talent. She's one of those comics creators whose line style is almost immediately recognizable. Mm-hmm. And she creates these wonderful, short, often wordless comics that get at, I think, really the heart of our interactions with each other. And Sweater Weather actually was originally published in a shorter format in 2013. Oh, sorry, I'm tired. That's the cough medicine talking. It was actually... Welcome to our world.
That's right.
It was originally, I believe, 2003, and but it's been reprinted with her notes as well as some news stories. So it's actually a longer text. And what makes this version so wonderful, in my opinion, are that, and with each story, you get a little snippet that she includes about what she was thinking when she wrote the original comic, for the ones who were from the original comics, and also sort of what her process was from the beginning of when she was a sort of comics creator at the very beginning of her career to where she is today as a comics creator. And so I think it'll be of interest not just to young readers, but also to people who are interested in the craft of comics.
I think so too, and I think that's one of the strengths of this book, that she shows you a little bit about the creative process, what she was thinking about, where stories come from, which is one of the questions that a lot of kids and adults ask when they're creating. In fact, yesterday I had a couple of young guys in the library, and they were looking for books on how to draw. And I took them to that, and then I took them to the graphic novel section too, and they were very excited. And it's funny because this morning at church, right before church was about to start, one of my friends who has two little boys tapped me on the shoulder, and he had written, or he had drawn a picture of some of the characters in Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales, and he was so proud, and he really did a great job. So kids really, really want to know about their comic book heroes, where their ideas come from, how can I do this? What were they thinking when they did this? And I mean, that's not the only reason to recommend Sweater Weather, but I think Varon does such a great job of giving young readers, not only permission to explore those things, but saying, okay, here's how I did it.
Yeah, let's actually go through an example if you'd like. I was interested when I first read through Alphabet Comic. I'll be honest, Andy, when I'm first reading a comic, my first read through is very quick, and I usually am focusing more on the art.
Me too.
And so then I have to go back and reread. And so when I got to Alphabet Comic, I just sort of read through the front really quickly, but I was actually much more interested in the comic. So I just flipped the page and I read the whole comic, and then I went back and I reread her notes. So I'd like to read it now for our listeners. Mm-hmm. She writes, Alphabet Comic, November 2001. This was an exercise that Tom Hart put out there back in the days when I did exercises for the sake of doing exercises. It's a reflection of the things I was doing in 2001, a sort of day in the life. And I'll be honest, Andy, that's when I stopped reading, turned the page, and started looking. But she goes on. She says, I see the magazines I was reading at the time. There were so many great magazines back then. I see the old neighborhood Key's Food supermarket on Grand Street in Williamsburg. And this one, I think I'm both characters, the person and the cat. And then you start reading through this particular comic, which is absolutely charming. And at the end, she sort of gives it away. She says, this comic has been an exercise in creating a 26-panel comic in which each panel corresponds to its respective letter of the alphabet. And sure enough, I went back, and it's absolutely true. And I don't think this is giving away too much for the readers, but because you'll still, I think you'll still have that enjoyment. But it was just so enjoyable to see that indeed through both word and image, she does that. And it's a great exercise for young comics creators who are, especially some of our listeners who, as you said, are interested in patterning their work after that of established creators. That's a wonderful exercise. And in fact, it's one of only many that she mentions in here that she herself did and still does to hone her craft as a comics creator.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on it until like the very end when one of the characters is reading a book called "Play the Xylophone in 10 Steps," and I thought, wait a minute, what's the? And then I read the last panel like you mentioned and said, oh, this is really really clever. And then I went back and did that too. And I think young creators want to do that, whether it's drawing or writing or making animation. They want to know how they did it, and they like to go back and see, oh, that's why they did this here. That's why they did that there. So I think this is just a brilliant way of doing that.
My first exposure to Varon was reading her text. I think it came out in 2007, Robot Dreams. Had you read Varon before this experience?
I have. I have read all the ones that you mentioned except for the cat books, or Chicken and Cat. I have not read those, but I've read all the others.
Well, Robot Dreams really had a profound impact on me because I read it when it first came out. And here's how I like to think about Varon. Oftentimes when I'm teaching children's literature that involves an animal that walks and talks, we call that anthropomorphism. And a lot of times it's a very effective technique for authors and illustrators to put forward ideas that they might not want to put in the mouth of a child, but they feel that they can put into the mouth of an animal. So, I think we've talked before about Paddington Bear and how Michael Bond used that character to try to discuss issues of immigration, but in a very subtle way. And here, the thing is, when I think about Sarah Varon, though, I don't actually think so much about anthropomorphism as I think that she's always sort of focused on bringing forward the interconnectedness and isolation of sentient beings. And I say that because the human and the animal meld so thoroughly in her stories that it feels like some quality beyond anthropomorphism. And I don't know if you've felt that as well, but I sort of see that happening, and that's why I'm thinking like even in a story like Dog and Robot, which is in some ways very much like the story that she ends up doing, Robot Dreams. It feels like sort of the sketches that would lead to that. She talks about how in this particular comic, she's writing about the betrayal of one creature to another. And she says, I decided to go with the theme of betrayal, not a malicious betrayal, but a friend who betrays another friend by accident, certainly without bad intentions. Though I didn't connect it at the time, I'd recently put my dog Violet to sleep, which is probably the source of the theme. This would make me the dog in the story and Violet the robot. And that's kind of what I mean about it's more, it feels to me like something just a little bit beyond anthropomorphism.
I think so too. And, when I was looking at these stories and the previous work that she's done too, I was thinking, how would I describe this to a parent at the library? I would say these stories are by and large good-natured, about friendships and as you said, the positive and sometimes the problems that we have in friendships. They're also about eating and baking and hospitality and good things. And those are the things that we do with friends. We like to eat together. We like to spend time together. But for me too, these are also about it's also about diversity because we've got a lot of different types of animals getting along.
Right.
And, I tend to think, if there's not to make things too simple, but if all these different animals can get along, you would think that all these different humans could get along too. And I think that in a way she's telling us that there's no reason why all of us, despite our differences, can't establish friendships. We can't be cordial to each other. There's no reason why these things can't happen. And someone might dismiss these stories as just, well, those are just children's stories. But I think that a lot of what Varon is doing is she's getting into the depth of who we are as people. And as you alluded to as well, Gwen, those are really big concepts, but it's so approachable the way that she makes these stories. I mean, this looks like something that we would all like to to do. I mean, these characters are all, by and large, very happy, very content, and very productive. And why can't we do that?
Right. And, in a way, the characters aren't just representing children. Most of these animals live in homes. Mm-hmm. They have checkbooks. Right. They go shopping. They read magazines and books on how to play the xylophone.
Right.
And so they're sort of existing in this sort of space where they're neither child nor adult. They're neither human nor animal. But as you say, they are trying to negotiate as best they can happy lives and lives in which they take into account, for the most part, the needs of others around them as well as their own needs. Mm. I think there's a real generosity of spirit in these stories, and I think that any age reader would find something of real sort of enjoyment, and it just gives you a good, warm feeling to read these texts. I think Sweater Weather is a wonderful title. It does refer to one of the things that occurs in one of the stories, but it's one of those cozy kind of books that you just want to curl up and read and really enjoy.
Yeah. Gwen, what was your favorite? Did you have a favorite in the collection?
Well, it's funny because probably for me it is Dog and Robot, not so much because of the illustrations, because actually there are lots of creative things that she does with comics throughout the stories that are fascinating to me. And I'm usually someone who's most interested in the structure of comics. But for me, I'm on my fourth dog now. I have very close relationship with dogs. They're my favorite animal, I have trouble reading Dog and Robot without tearing up, so I have to be really careful. So when I saw that, Robot Dreams, actually. And so when I saw Dog and Robot, I'm like, oh, do I need to get out the Kleenex, and not just because of the cold? And I didn't tear up, but I will say that she has a way of drawing the faces of her animals and robots and other sentient beings that just gives you such a clear understanding of what they're thinking inside and how they're reacting to others. And so I find all of them to be heartwarming, but probably because that story ends in a really complicated way. It really makes you sort of think through what's happened and recognizing maybe that there were places along the way in the story when things could have been done differently and there could have been a more positive outcome. Mm-hmm. I sort of liked the angst that was part of that story. Maybe I'm just in the mood it's springtime and I'm in the mood for angst. But what was your favorite story?
I liked Lion Comic.
Oh, yeah.
And Lion Comic is a very, very short. If you've got your copy with you, it's on page 95. And it's a fun book. It's very, very short story. And the first panel, you've got this lion that is, we're not sure if it's the bookstore or the library, but the lion is picking up a title from self-help book section. And it's called How to Fit In the African Grassland. So you've got this lion that's reading this book, and then the lion goes into the African grassland and tries to get along with the other animals. The lion climbs this ladder so that it can get to the same food that the giraffes are eating. And then the lion is wearing this zebra-like sweater and playing cards with the zebras. And it's just so much fun to see how this lion, and again, is trying to understand what other beings are like. Not to belittle them or to criticize them, but just to see what's their life like. And I just really, really liked that. I mean, it's a very short story, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's cute, too, because in the beginning, Varon, writing her commentary on the story, says, she says, at the time, I had this lion character who I drew a lot. I liked the idea that he was totally misguided, but also completely happy in his ignorance. Mm-hmm. In the story, he thinks he succeeded in fitting in with the other animals. Not only does he not really fit in, but he doesn't seem to understand that as a lion, he doesn't need to fit in because he's at the top of the social order. But actually, Andy, I think your interpretation is excellent as well, because in a book, as you say, that's about people learning to get along and interacting well with each other. In many respects, that's what this this little comic is about. And it's funny, I just called it a little comic because I want to make a point. One of my favorite comics creators is Lucy Nisley. And she's about the same generation as Sara Varon. These are women who are in their late 20s, early 30s, who most of whom went to art school and have been drawing comics for about a decade. You might know Lucy Nisley's work. She did a graphic novel called French Milk. She did one a few years ago called Relish, which is about her family's sort of very long-standing involvement in the food industry and her own experience selling cheese and making recipes. And both of them were highly successful New York Times bestsellers. But Nisley's style is a lot like Sara Varon's. It's a gentle drawing style. The lines are soft and sort of rounded. The stories themselves are often quiet meditations on people's interactions and relationships with each other. And I think sometimes those comics get pushed to the side in favor of people discussing comics where there's sort of life and death and everything is at stake, and there's all this huge drama. But I think in some ways it would be a mistake to assume that just because something's drawn in a soft line style, just because the color palette is soothing, doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of depth there. And there really is. I think that this is a beautiful book that both parents and young readers would really enjoy.
I think so too. And I would encourage readers to also read some of Varon's other books. Maybe even before this one, the ones that you mentioned, Robot Dreams, Bake Sale, Odd Duck, Chicken and Cat, because it will probably give you a little bit more of a grounding in what her work is like, and then maybe go to Sweater Weather. But, for some readers, Sweater Weather might be the best place to start.
Well, what I find is really great is that in addition to, again, sort of commenting on comics that she had drawn in the past, she puts a couple of contemporary comics in the text. And the last one is one that I think we could use to segue into our final text. This is a comic that, let me page over to it. This is a comic that she calls Dinosaur Comic. And she says this was submitted for the Strapazin Animal issue in 2009, but rejected. And she says the Lion comic took its place. So again, this really gives you an insight as to what it's like to be a comics creator. She said, I used it in 2014 as a vehicle to experiment with using two colors. It was the first comic that I had colored for this book. Idea-wise, the framework is a short story about dinosaurs. I like the idea that they look scary and mean, but really they are just uncomfortable, and all they need is a little ice cream.
Yeah. I love that. I just love the way that story goes.
That's pretty much what the story is about, but I found it to be so refreshing because then, I'd actually read the comics in the order in which we're discussing them, and I thought, oh, what a great segue into science comics, dinosaurs, fossils, and feathers. So, yay. Yeah, dinos are everywhere.
They are, and I think that's a perfect segue, just like you said. Well, this is the book we're talking about now is called Dinosaurs, Fossils, and Feathers by M.K. Reed and Joe Flood. Now, this is also part of a series from First Second Publishers, and they have a press release that says Science Comics extends our nonfiction offerings to middle grade readers. The Science Comics will be a narrow-focus, single-topic, 128-page narrative nonfiction graphic novel, and a new volume will be published each season. The series will be written and drawn by some of the finest graphic novelists in the industry and feature introductions by leading experts. Each book will cover topics from the fields of biology, chemistry, physics, subjects that are part of the classroom curriculum, and can be easily worked into lesson plans. Other volumes include Coral Reefs by Maris Wicks, and I think, Gwen, they have a whole line of them planned for the future.
Absolutely.
There's one on flying machines, how the Wright brothers soared, bats, the solar system, and so this is just one of several types of books about science that First Second is publishing.
And, the author is M.K. Reed. The illustrator is Joe Flood. And they've actually worked together before. They created a series called The Cute Girl Network that was published by First Second Books in 2013. Actually, they also worked with Greg Means on that title. And it's one that I definitely want to read. It's YA oriented, and it looks like a lot of fun. Reed herself is the author of a number of graphic novels, including America's Pale Fire and this text, Science Dinosaurs. And she lives in Portland, as she says, with her very tall husband. And Flood went to the School of Visual Arts intending to study painting. But once he got there, he was deeply influenced by a number of comics creators whom he met who were, sort of ahead of him in the program. And he found that the more that he drew comics, the more that he enjoyed it. His first self-published series was called Don't Eat the Electric Sheep, which is, like, as far as titles go, pretty much awesome. And so they've come together to create this really lovely text on one of my favorite subjects, actually, which is dinosaurs. So I just also want to say really quickly, First Second is doing such a great job with nonfiction titles. We've talked about Human Body Theater by Maris Wicks on the show before. She has a volume in the Science Comics that is on coral reefs, which I have on my desk, and I'm very excited to read. This volume doesn't disappoint either. It really is fascinating. What did you think about it?
Well, Gwen, I'm glad you mentioned all the great work that they're doing at First Second. And, to me, well, before I get to that, I'll talk a little bit about how the book is set up. One of the things that I think the book does so well is it shows different people and different ideas through the ages about discovering dinosaur bones and evidence of dinosaurs, and people throughout history trying to explain them. And one of the first things that we have is William Smith, who's teaching about fossils and how they came about. And we really go through an entire history of ideas and ideals about dinosaurs, how the thinking was at certain times throughout history, how it changed. But this is far from a boring history text. This is actually comic storytelling at its best, because you've got a combination of words and pictures to aid in understanding. I mean, dinosaurs, a lot of us tend to think of dinosaurs, or at least I do, as something that kids really, really enjoy, and adults don't think about too much after the kids are grown. But there is so much great thinking and so many great ideas and so many things that are still so relevant to now, even though, dinosaurs have not roamed the earth in such a long time. And you would think that everything that in the book are things that we already know. I mean, I learned so much from this book about, where dinosaurs came from, what happened to them, and how they continue to influence what we do and how we think. I mean, there's so much in here, but the parts of it that I like is there's something for everybody. There's the history of dinosaurs. There's tremendous artwork. I mean, just absolutely gorgeous. And it's done in such a way that concepts that are difficult to explain.
Excuse me. Go ahead.
Oh, bless you.
Thanks.
The concepts that are so difficult to explain are made so much easier because we have such great artwork, and the creators are taking us through a way that not only we understand, but more importantly, kids would understand about this. And there's a lot of humor in it too. A lot of times the dinosaurs are drawn as if they are, as you say, anthropomorphic. They're talking to each other. There's a lot of fun being had. My favorite part is where they one of the scientists discovers these in Haddonfield, New Jersey in 1858. He discovers these dinosaur bones, And he thinks back to like what it would have been like 100 million years ago when these dinosaurs in New Jersey are hanging out, and it's got a picture of one of the dinosaurs saying, "Hey, Joe," and the other dinosaur says, "Hey, Donnie, how you doing?" And you think, of course, it's exactly like what New Jersey would be like 100 million years ago. And there's a scene that talks about dinosaur poop and, you know, what happens to it. And it's so much stuff because it's stuff that a kid could get excited about, but then they're learning at the same time. To me, this is the perfect type of nonfiction graphic novel.
Yeah, you know, in many ways also it humanizes the process of scientific discovery. There's a wonderful quote that the narrator puts forward on page 108 and says, and they're talking about how various generations of scientists have held different hypotheses about dinosaurs and how to classify them, etc. And they're illustrating the way in which one team has discovered something that calls into question a theory that had been put forward by a previous team of researchers. And the narration says, "But that's how science works. We do our best with the data we have and revise our theories when new information becomes available." And I think that's so important. There's this wonderful section towards the middle, Andy, that I'm sure you enjoyed as well, because it is somewhat humorous, and it's known as, it was a pretty well-known feud between two major researchers, one Othaniel Marsh and the other Edward Drinker Cope. And actually, it's called the Fossil Wars or the Bone Wars, and you have these two men actually in some ways destroying each other's work, and they're so competitive with each other. They try to take credit for each other's discoveries. But I think it's good for young people to read things like this, because I think when kids think about science, sometimes they're encouraged to think about it more in terms of subjects that they're learning in school. But really, science is such a human endeavor. And I think that this series does a really good job of showing how what we know about dinosaurs today is the result of a long process of negotiation among a lot of very complicated people trying their best to understand what happened in the past.
Right. I mean, there's so many different, and this book does such a great job of exploring so many different types of scientific work, so many different types of theories, and not everyone has the same theory, not everyone has the same belief system, but all of it is in the view of science, and science is the main thing. And like you said, things change. Science changes. We learn new things. We're always learning more, and not only in science but in life too. And I think that's another thing that this book does so well, is it shows kids, you know, always be ready for something new. Always be ready to possibly change the way you think about something. A lot of the times that we think things are a certain way, there's evidence that something else may be different.
Right. And, you know, there's also, just as you said earlier, you talked about the beautiful illustration, but a lot of the more complicated scientific principles are actually illustrated in this text. For instance, over on page 46, there's an illustration of Darwin's theories of species and where dinosaurs fit into that. And I love the names of some of these, like the iguanodon. That is just the greatest name.
Yeah. That is great.
And the Elasmosaurus. See, this is the thing with having a cold. Everything sounds even better than it was meant to. But for people who are more visual thinkers, who enjoy learning through visuals, there are many opportunities to do that in this text as well. And it's also just lovingly colored. I mean, this, of all the texts that we've looked at today, this is certainly a text that uses color super effectively, and really treats the subject with a lot of respect. In fact, I would say that if you enjoyed Neil deGrasse Tyson's reboot of Cosmos, you are really going to enjoy this book, because if you'll recall, I love that series. It first came out in 2014, and one of the things that was interesting is Tyson was also trying to underscore this, that science is made by human beings, and human beings are not only fallible, but they're emotional. And this is their career or their life or their passion. And he used cartooning to show the lives and histories of scientists. And the same thing is happening here in book form. So I think that if you enjoyed Cosmos, you are really going to enjoy science comics. But you don't have to be a comics nerd to enjoy it, because or any other kind of nerd, although most of us are, I hope. But but because it also, if you're just interested in a good story, there's an amazing narrative that runs through this text and is filled with all sorts of action, adventure, and excitement.
And Gwen, one of the things that I love about this book is, and you just alluded to it, I think you could come to this book at any age. Even kids that can't read yet would probably enjoy looking at these pictures. And, kids basically from birth love dinosaurs. So they're going to enjoy these pictures as a very, very young reader. A little bit later, they'll come back to it and they'll understand more of what is being written. And I mean, this is a book you could come back to over and over and over and just wear out. I mean, we have kids coming into the library all the time that are interested in dinosaurs. And, the age range, I think the appropriate age range for this book is basically unlimited, because you can keep coming back to it, keep finding more things out. Again, it works on a very, very fundamental level, and it works on a very, very sophisticated level as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of jokes, as you said. There's a lot of humor. In fact, I've been reading up on the two authors, and reviewers of M.K. Reed's work say that she's really excellent with dialogue. And that is absolutely true. You quoted some of it before, the Jersey Dinosaurs.
Yeah.
A lot of the humor in this text comes from her dialogue. But then there's very serious scientific information embedded in the text as well. So I think, as you say, there's really something for everyone with this comic.
Yeah, I think so too. And actually, I was going to look and see what ages that it's recommended for.
Well, the press release said middle grade, but I agree with you, Andy. I think that if I were a kid, even pre-reading, my mom or dad could have read this to me, and I would have really enjoyed it. But I could also see a teenager working on a report, using it as a reference text among other texts, more traditional print texts, without any trouble whatsoever. And that's the nice thing about the nonfiction books at First Second. They go through such an excellent review that when you're reading one of them, like Maris Wick's The Human Body Theater, which we've really talked so highly about. Mm-hmm. It's really super accurate. And my mom, who's a former nurse, was reading through it and really said, oh my gosh, that's true. But, it's told in a way that's engaging, that draws readers in. Like you said, it's sort of like, I know how much you love the Nathan Hale books. And again, those are texts which tell history, but not in a dry way, in a way that involves a strong narrative and beautiful visuals. And yeah, I agree. I think this book is going to be super, super popular.
I do too. And I can't wait to look at the volumes that are going to be coming out.
I know we'll have to put some of those in our hopper for future reviews.
We definitely will. Well, Gwen, we've talked about 3 really, really cool books today. And I want to remind everybody, and we want to talk about possibly where you can get some of these books in just a moment. But before we do that, I wanted to remind you that when you're reading your comics, don't forget to get caffeinated. Stop by at Just Coffee, our sponsor, and that is justcoffee.coop. Use the coupon code COMICS for a 10% discount. Enjoy free shipping, and you can help out the Comics Alternative as well. And when you're taking a look at the comics that we talked about today, if you'll stop by DCB Service and their sister company, In Stock Trades, you'll find tons of amazing comics priced at 30% off. And after you get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you think about these books. You can contact us by going to our website at comicsalternative.com. And on the right-hand side of our browser, you could see a tab that reads Send Voicemail. Click on that, and from the comfort of your own desktop or mobile device, you can send us a message through the wonders of SpeakPipe. Or, if you want to contact us the old school way, you can call us on the telephone at 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. Or you can contact us by email at 2guys@comicsalternative.com. Or you can get in touch with us individually. I'm Wolverton at comicsalternative.com. And Gwen, how can folks reach you?
Folks can reach me at gwen@comicsalternative.com. You can also find us on Twitter, where we announce new content of our podcast and updates to our blog. And on Twitter, our handle is at 2guyswithPhDs, the number 2.
That's right. And you can also find us on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, and Pinterest. We also have a YouTube channel, so you can access us that way. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, stream us on Stitcher, and you can find us on TuneIn, and you can discover every single one of our episodes, as well as our reviews and comics-related commentary on our blog at comicsalternative.com. And Gwen, I think I almost forgot to tell people about the books that we could find on in stock trades.
Well, let me sit down this Kleenex and I'll tell you.
Sorry about that. I almost forgot.
That's okay. I was just sitting here blowing my nose. So, Reed and Flood Science Comics, Dinosaurs, Fossils, and Feathers is available for $6.99 at Discount Comic Book Service. That's a savings of 30%. And over at their sister site, In Stock Trades, you can get Rust, Boy Soldier for $17.49. That's 30% off cover. And they also have Varon, Sweater Weather, and Other Short Stories for $14.99, which is 25% off. And just as an added thing, too, we had talked about Robot Dreams. They have that text for $13.56, which is 20% off. So there's all sorts of savings that you can get on our coffee from Just Coffee and from Discount Comic Book Service and In Stock Trades. You will be all set for your caffeine and comic reading needs, so that if, like Andy and me, you are at home sick, you will have something to read.
That's right. So if you got your caffeine, you got your comics, what else do you need?
What else, indeed? Well, maybe Kleenex.
Maybe Kleenex. Yeah. I don't think either of our sponsors offers those, but I guess you can't have everything.
That's right.
Well, Gwen and I will be back next time to talk about some more new comics for young readers. And until then, I'm Andy.
And I'm Gwen. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.